Yeah, whatever, the library over there. And I remember I get this book on the occult. And I sit there in the library and I practice the first technique that they tell you to do. And then I go, and I couldn't check the book out because I wasn't in school then. And I didn't want to put the book back where it belonged because somebody might check it out. So I hid it somewhere in the library. So, I might know that trick, And I'm going to come back and I'm going to read it later. Now, this might not mean a lot to some of you, but to some of you, you know what I'm talking about. I'm walking through the library. And literally in one hand, for the first time in my life, I got this book on the occult. And literally in my other hand, for the first time in my life, I got this book that the guy handed me in the health food store. Occult book in one hand and this other book in my other hand. And for those of you who know, it's called The Great Controversy. Yes. And really, if there was ever a book geared that might have helped get me aware of what the occult things were that I was into, this would have been the book. But at the time, I had no idea what was going on. I had no idea. Things were kind of narrowing down. Anyway, the bottom line, about 2 nights later, the sun is setting here in Gainesville. There was this little coffee shop that used to be down near the backstage bar. Nothing's here. Everything's changed. But I walked back to my room, Gainesville. It's over by the post office. Been working on my novel 2.5 years. It was going better than it had ever been going. I was more encouraged, more excited about my book than I ever was. I just knew that I was going to write a great novel, and I just, whether it would get published, whether it would get rich, fame, whatever, I didn't know. I was very confident. Nothing else mattered to me. If you asked me at that time, did I believe in God, did I believe in Jesus, I would have said, well, I know between meeting my double and having these occult experiences, I was pretty much cured of my hardcore materialist view of reality. I knew there was a whole other dimension out there, okay, a whole other aspect of reality that wasn't what I, was more than atoms in the void. I mean, I was way past that at this point. Okay? The nature of it and all that, that was another issue, but I was beyond that. But outside of that, nothing changed. I go back to my room, just right around the corner there. I walked this morning and just to see it, there was just, I think they even got rid of the road. I think they got rid of the road and just got these big apartments there. And I come into my room and I sit down to work on my novel. And just to make sure I make this clear, this dates me a lot, but I got to be careful with younger audiences. They don't understand this. I think I'm doing this on a word processor, okay? But I've got a manual typewriter, okay? They probably only see pictures of them, okay? Anyway, I sit down and put a sheet of paper on the typewriter. I put my finger on the keys. And at that moment, as real as anything that ever happened to me, the presence of the Lord Jesus Christ came into the room. In a split instant, I knew who he was. Never a question. I knew who he was, and I knew exactly what he wanted. He said, Cliff, you have been playing with me long enough. And now, this next word is the most important one of the whole thing. If you want me tonight, burn the novel. Clear and as simple as that. If you want me tonight, in that split second, I realized the Lord showed me that novel was my God. And I didn't know anything about the Bible, but at that moment I suddenly realized I didn't know there was a commandment, you shall have no other gods before me. But at that moment I knew that I could have anything before God, and this novel was my God. And I say if, because folks, I'm telling you, this whole time this was going on, I knew that I didn't have to do this. I knew the whole time this was going on, the whole time I was getting the pressure put on me, I was totally aware of free will and free choice. He says, if you want me tonight, burn the novel. And I said, God, please, this is all I have. I've got nothing. I said, let me just finish the book, and then I'll give my life to you. If you want me tonight, burn the novel. I said, God, please, I'll rewrite it all to your glory. The whole time, I'm telling you, it was so amazing. I look back because I'm aware that I have free choice. If you want me, burn the novel. God, please, can't we just put it away? Let me just put it away and we'll deal with this later. If you want me, burn the novel. Well, folks, I couldn't have burned that novel. I could have slit my throat easy that. I had nothing else. I was 23 years old. I poured everything into this. I didn't have a dime in my pocket. Everything, you'll never be a writer. The things that people go through like that. I poured everything, and to burn it, I would have nothing. And I remember I just jumped up out of my seat. I just burst into tears. And I ran out of the room. And I was walking through the streets of Gainesville. And these were the same streets that I walked through when I left that pizza parlor a couple of years earlier. Remember, and I said I wanted to know truth no matter the cost. And now, 3 years later, I'm confronted with the cost, and it was like, wasn't going to do it. I couldn't do it. I just couldn't do it. I couldn't give that up. It was my life. I had nothing else but my novel. And I'm just walking through these streets, and a lot of things are going through my mind. And finally, at one point, I stopped. And why I always remember this detail, I don't know. I stopped underneath a street lamp. It was night, and the bugs were flying above the lamp, and they just casting their little shadows on the ground. Why I remember that detail, I don't know. But I remember I'm standing there, and a whole lot of things are going through my mind. And finally, at one point, I said, okay, God, I want you. I want truth more than I want this novel. But if you want it burned, you're going to have to burn it for me. Because I just can't do it. And I did, and I am adamant about my free choice. God did not force. But I did sort of feel this kind of this grip around my neck. But the moment I made that choice, the moment I said, okay, God, I want you, I want more. It was amazing. It just lifted off. And boom, at that moment, I knew exactly what was going to happen. I knew exactly what I was going to do. And I'm telling you, there wasn't a qualm. There wasn't a doubt. I mean, just total peace, even though I had no idea what I was getting into, no idea anything at all. I didn't know anything about the Bible. I didn't know anything. I knew nothing about anything. If you would have told me back then I was a sinner, I would have looked at you like you were an idiot. A sinner? You got to be out of your mind. What are you talking about? I knew nothing about anything. I just went back to my room. And I had this little 2-burner hot plate that my mother had given me in the hopes that I would actually cook a meal. That's what Harry Krishna for, I wasn't, I ate with them. And it's funny, I was out there the other day and I talked to him, and I knew one of the head of the Hare Krishna thing, because I was hanging out there. We became friends and stayed in touch over the years. I kind of lost touch with him now. But anyway, I go back, I take the hot plate, and I pick up my manuscript. 2.5 years of my life. And I had no idea what I was getting into, no idea whatever. I laid that manuscript on the burner without a qualm, without a doubt, just turn the knob and burn the novel that night. And that night I became a born-again believer in Jesus. And folks, I burned it in 1979. And here I am 30-some years later. And never for a moment have I ever been sorry that I burned the book. And see, it's very interesting too. Let me just pull a few loose ends in. Some of you might find this hard. I'm convinced, once I burned that novel, those occult experiences never came back. And, you can say the idea of the devil and so on, but you see, folks, I know. You want me to prove to you logically, rationally, literal devil? I can't prove to you logically, rationally, a literal God. But man, he overplayed his hand, which was a stupid move on his part, because the way I was raised, But the moment I burned that novel, those occult experiences never came back. Scripture says, greater is he that is in you than he that is in the world. So that never was bothered with them again. And Jed Smock came back. And I went out with Jed, and he probably thought, oh, here we go again. And I don't think at the beginning he believed me. But in the end, I ended up witnessing with him to some of the students, many of them who remembered me as Heckle, which was kind of interesting. And I guess the funny thing too, when I burned that novel that night, I realized I might not ever write again. I was fine. I died to it. That's the way it was going to be. That's the way it was going to be. And for about 2 years, I never wrote, never did anything. And then one day, door opened up for me to write. And that's all I've been doing ever since. It's how I've published 20 books. I just published a play. And writing, editing. So it's like I believe God gave it back to me, but it's not a God to me anymore. And so on. And it's interesting too. Because it was funny, because right after this happened, I went back to that health food store. Told them what happened and said I want to study the Bible. And they gave me a Bible study on Daniel 2. And it was like, as I said yesterday, if you want, I challenge anybody. Folks who put this seminar on, they'll give you a study on Daniel 2. I challenge anybody. Open-minded to get a study on Daniel 2 and then ask yourself how in the world that could have been done in the Bible without there being something supernatural doing it. But see, here's the funky thing about my conversion story, for lack of a better term. If you'll notice everything that just happened to me, it was totally experiential. It was totally... See, I didn't come to this through working through logic, through reason. That all came after. Remember for those who came to my meetings, past 2, remember I kept on telling you I cheat? This is how I cheat. I didn't work my way through it logically. I had this experience. And based on that experience, I came to know God. And then over time, was able to build an intellectual foundation on it since then. And it's funny, I don't like to equate myself with the Apostle Paul in any way, shape, or form. But if you go back, if you know the story of the Apostle Paul, what did Paul's intellect get him to do? What did his education, his training get him to do? Got him to kill Christians. That's what his intellect and his training. And then Paul's going along. If you know the story, Damascus Road, he has this supernatural encounter. I mean, you can read all sorts of stuff, people trying to say, oh, Paul drank too much Syrian wine. Paul was an epileptic. All this stuff to try to explain. And people try to explain what happened to me. Some of the same stuff. All this stuff. Paul had an experience. In a sense, he was pulled out of his old worldview, given a whole new paradigm, and put back in. And as I said, I don't like equating myself with him, but I can relate, because that's exactly what happened to me that night. I met Jesus that night, I had that experience, and I had a whole new set of first principles that ultimately later I was able to build a foundation on. And that's basically how I ended up doing what I'm doing and being where I am now, writing and editing and so on. And it happened here in Gainesville. So, you have any questions? Go ahead.
I remember, I feel like I'm having a similar experience with Idol in my life. I'm wondering, I know you said that once you never were sorry for burning the book. Do you ever get tempted to make writing an idol again?
Well, do I ever tempt to get? No, not really. I mean, especially as you get older, you get a perspective on things.